Will India and China go to war in 30 years? And Atharva says, is a Russia, India, China RIC alliance possible? Okay, so will India and China go to war in 30 years? India and China could go to war next weekend or next month or next year or sometime in the next decade. 30 years is too long a time horizon for India and China going to war. As India rises and as China stagnates, the Chinese may become desperate and look for, and um, look to give their people a reason to keep supporting the Chinese Communist Party and whoever is the Chinese emperor at the time. Right now it's Mr. Xi Jinping, who is the de facto emperor of China. China is not doing well anymore. Understand that. Like I said, there is a complete realignment of the global geopolitical system at work right now. It's happening right now. So what is happening? It's all being triggered not by the Ukraine conflict, but something that happened a couple of years before that. What happened 2 years ago? What happened in late 2019? There was a virus that spread across the world, right? The coronavirus. Some people call it the Wuhan virus, the COVID virus, whatever you want to call it. The Wuhan coronavirus, the pandemic, which the reports first came out in 2019, and then 2020 was a disaster, 2021 was a disaster, 2022 right now we were limping back to normalcy kind of, and then the Ukraine conflict happened. So what did the coronavirus pandemic do? Whom did it hurt the most? It sent the whole world into a recession. It rendered millions, maybe billions of people jobless. It destroyed economies. It caused all kinds of chaos worldwide in every nation, in the first world, in Europe, in the US, also in China, also in India. Lots of people suffered. Millions, hundreds of millions of Indians, like, they barely survived this kind of pandemic, not because of the illness but because of the shutting down of the economy. It was a disaster worldwide. India, of course, did much better than the other nations in supporting its population. Anyhow, that's a whole different story. So the coronavirus pandemic brought ground China down to a halt, the economy. They put out some numbers that looked encouraging, but now we see that China is not doing well economically. The bigger problem it caused for China is the complete shutting down, as more or less, of the One Belt One Road OBOR initiative, or the Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI. So what is the BRI thing, right? Let's take a look at the OBOR and BRI and all that. Let's take a look at that. That was China's great bid for world domination. It was their great bid for superpower status. In 2008, the Chinese decided that now is the time. Now is our time for trying to become a superpower. Our time is now, and we have to grab the chance. So they launched this One Belt One Road initiative, which was supposed to connect China through Central Asia to Europe. Yeah, and it also had a maritime, the maritime Silk Road component, which would connect China to all these other nations, including Africa. So they would get cheap resources, minerals, and all those things from Africa. They would use African labor, and they would also build a massive connectivity with the whole of Europe, and that would integrate China's economy with the European economy and other things, and that would be what leads China to becoming the number one economy in the world, and that would ensure that they become the superpower and the US declines, right? But so that was the great hope, the great ambition of the Chinese. The coronavirus pandemic derailed that. It derailed that. All the work stopped in these regions. Then you had the Taliban thing, which happened in Afghanistan. The Americans withdrew from Afghanistan. That set the whole place for some time into chaos, right? There was a lot of instability there. So that also contributed to the slowing down, to the grinding to a halt of the OBOR thing, right? And now we have the Ukraine conflict. So once again, this Eastern Europe region is completely paralyzed. You don't even see planes flying too much over the region. And now further, you have the energy crisis and the food crisis. These have been essentially created artificially. Yes, you blow up pipelines. You try to impose price caps on Russian petroleum products. You impose sanctions on Russia. You ensure that no food grains flow out of Ukraine, and so on. It's going to cause a global energy crisis, a global food crisis. Who is it going to affect the most? Europe is going to suffer this winter. We know that. It's going to affect the global south even more, the so-called third world. Africa is going to suffer. Africa is going to suffer. And China seeks a great amount of resources, minerals, and other wealth from Africa, and cheap labor as well. So that is not going to work. So this has essentially derailed China's superpower ambitions, right? So that's one thing that's happened. The other thing the Chinese are hoping for is that as a consequence of the Ukraine conflict, which Mr. Putin started, well, but he started it in retaliation. That's a whole different story. I've spoken about it many times. So China's great hope was that as a consequence of the enormous, massive US sanctions on Russia, Russia would have to come begging to China for help. And then Russia would become China's vassal state, a junior partner, and China could then impose very one-sided conditions on Russia, and then reduce Russia to another Africa. Use Russia for resources and cheap labor and all that, and enrich itself at Russia's expense. So that would again boost China's superpower ambitions, even though the OBOR seems to be dead. So the Belt and Road interface is already like it's collapsed, but Russia could serve as the counterweight to that. So China was hoping that Russia would become their vassal state, and they could use Russia to enrich themselves and become a superpower. The problem is this: despite all the sanctions, Russia is thriving. First of all, they've done well with the ruble. They've attached it to the price of gold. The ruble is the gold standard now, so the ruble is doing well. It's in demand and all that. And secondly, as soon as the sanctions were imposed on Russia, they found an ally. That ally was India. India overnight increased its oil purchases from Russia 50-fold, 50 times. So that way, Russia did not have to depend on China, right? And once the other thing that happened is that India revived the what is it called, the north-south transport corridor between India, Iran, and Russia. Let's take a look at that. NTSC, North-South Transport Corridor. What is that? Okay, a statutory warning as always. Wikipedia is not a reliable source of information, but just for convenience sake, I'm putting this up over here. The International North-South Transport Corridor is a multimodal network of all these things between India and Russia. The starting point is Mumbai. One endpoint is Mumbai, the other endpoint is Moscow, right? It passes through Iran. It also passes through Azerbaijan and so on. So this is the thing. So because of this, because we have restarted this, it's going to again act as a pressure release valve for Moscow, for Russia. So India is buying massive amounts of petroleum products from Russia, mainly crude oil, 50 times more than it was doing. And India is restarting this thing, which the Iranians essentially had stopped. Now Iran is also cooperating with India and Russia in this. So India ensured that Russia does not have to go begging to China. Russia is now standing on its own with the help of India and Iran. Yeah, that's what's happening. So India is not entirely broken, has not entirely broken off with the West. India is still part of the Quad. India is still part of various initiatives with the US, the I2U2 initiative. So India is now acting as a bridge between the East and the West. That's what's happening. And India is now emerging as a major power because of all these actions and all these decisions it is taking. Yes, it is vitally important today for Russia, the existence of India. So India is now, whether you like it or not, some people may disagree with me, India is now a great power. It's already become a great power. But obviously, this is a very dangerous situation for India. India is still a reasonably small economy, 3.6 trillion dollars GDP, and our military might is also not that large. It's something that's proportionate to the GDP. We do have nukes, which kind of helps us. So that is the situation we find ourselves in. Russia is not collapsing. Russia is not going to be balkanized. Russia has enough strength of its own, and India is helping it out when it comes to the economy and all that. So because of this, the Chinese find themselves kind of sidelined. None of their hopes, aspirations have worked out for them. They are not going to become a superpower anytime soon. Their economy is crawling. Their Belt and Road interface initiative, whatever it is dead in the water. They have not been able to turn Russia into a vassal state. Russia is strong. Russia is stronger than before. Yeah, whatever you're hearing in the news, please don't trust it. Don't trust the Western media, and don't trust the Indian media, which is echoing the Western media. So this is where we are. India and Russia have emerged stronger out of it, but we have major threats now. Now, though, the US looks at India also essentially as an adversary. But yeah, it anyway looked at India as an adversary. It simply wanted to use India for some time as a counterweight to China. Now all these things happened. They are now focusing on Russia because Russia scares them more than China. China is now no longer rising as it would have or should have. So that's where we are. So we are seeing the belligerent response of the US. They are trying to shake up the entire global economy. They are printing uh, billions and trillions of dollars, and they're raising interest rates, which is destroying all the other economies. The euro has crashed. The pound, the British pound has crashed. The yen has crashed. India and China's currencies have gone down 10%. So yeah, they are trying to sow chaos in the world. They have created this artificial fuel crisis and the food crisis. So that's what we see. So right now it looks like India, Russia, China, Iran may have to band together in some way or the other. But India and China can never ever be allies. Can never be allies. At best, we could have some kind of arrangement of convenience like we have between Russia and China today. Russia and China, if you look at the map, they can never be allies because they share a long common border and a disputed border. It may not be disputed right now, but it's a dormant dispute. The Chinese would like to reopen it whenever it suits them. Uh, yeah, so Russia and China share a very long border. It's been a border on which they have fought. They almost went to nuclear war once. Russia had decided to nuke the Chinese, and the Americans saved the Chinese. So India and China also have this long undemarcated border. We can consider the Nepal border as also as the India border, and so on. So yeah, India and China can never ever be allies. We can never have a good relationship as long as Tibet is in Chinese hands. But there could be a temporary, arrangement of convenience for some time as long as a bigger enemy threatens both. Uh, so essentially, whether some kind of arrangement between Russia, India, and China happens or not, Iran will also be involved if it does happen. So whether such an arrangement or some temporary alliance happens or not, all depends on what course of action the United States takes. If the United States, if the US does things that threaten all these nations at the same time, then you could have these nations banding together, coming together for some time, in order to withstand the threat together. Yeah. But if the US is smart enough, they could play one nation off against the other. And there are lots of tools they have in their toolkit. Yeah, they are past masters at divide and rule. The US is an extension. It's a continuation of the British Empire. The British were renowned for their divide and rule policies. So yeah, that's where we are. Is an alliance between Russia, China, India possible? Most likely not. But yeah, if the US forces everyone's hand, then these nations may come together along with Iran, which is a very strange assortment of bedfellows. But yeah, it could happen. But do not ever make the mistake of thinking that India and China can be friends or have a good relationship as long as Tibet is under temporary Chinese occupation. Simply can't happen. But yeah, we could have some kind of alliance or arrangement of convenience which would be temporary in nature.